Good morning. How are you? Thank you so much, Shauna, for the invitation. I'm pleased to be the opening speaker for today. As I was putting my slides together, I realized this is the first talk I've given since before COVID. Yeah, so it's been a minute. So if I'm a little nervous, well, bear with me. I'm sure it's like riding a bike. We'll be rocking and rolling in here in just a minute. So yeah, I'm on faculty in the Department of Animal Science at Texas A&M, and I've got a background in a lot of different species, but right now I spend some time with cattle because cattle is king in Texas. And so just thought we would take a little minute to have a little bit of reflection as to how some of the beef industry works and maybe impacts the cattle that are within the industry. And then from my review of the literature, there was not a whole lot of information in the social mixing space. So I'll go through some of the research that I've been doing on social mixing, and then I just have a forever and always soft spot for environmental enrichment. My background's in zoos, and so to me, that's the name of the game. So I'll take you through a little quick interlude through environmental enrichment for cattle, which is primarily brushes. Yeah. And if you have questions at any time, feel free to try to catch my eye. If I can stop and chat, I'm happy to do so. Oh, down is advanced. That makes total sense. Okay. All right, here we go. Okay, beef industry, we know that it is rooted in sustainability. That's one of the themes for our meeting today. The beef industry is dedicated to the planet, right? They are essentially a sigil of sustainability. There's always the interaction between the animals and the land. It's rooted in responsibility to the people. Not only is it an industry of production, but it's an industry of culture. So when you're dealing with individuals within the beef industry, it's really important to understand how the cattle influence the culture of their lives and their decision-making processes. Because and the other thing that the beef industry really does well is there's a lot of honoring the ethos of cattle themselves, because so much of their life is spent on pasture. There is also a culture of sustainability and constant improvement. So the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef has high priority indicators, one of which is animal health and well-being, and they've been excellent proponents and advocates of the beef quality assurance system, getting people certified and educated, because this program is designed to educate producers about the management strategies of, and so where to put vaccinations, record keeping, some of this stuff. And as I was digging into some of this, I was finding that there are reports that if you're selling animals online with the lot description that includes BQA training, that some have reported having increased price premiums for the cattle if the people have been BQA certified. But there are some wrinkles in that because there needs to be some consistent verbiage for that to really gain traction in the marketplace. So I'm just kind of throwing that out there for consideration, thought, and conversation. But as we know, no system is perfect, right? There are wrinkles and complications, and that's okay. Trade-offs and compromises are inherent to life, and it doesn't matter what species you are, it's to life. COI will stand over here. Trade-offs and complications. Like I'm blind in my right eye right now. Sorry. But from an outsider, like I didn't grow up in the beef industry, but from the outside perspective, it looks like a lot of the power that we have in our ability to propagate and perpetuate sustainability lies at the cow-calf sector. And I find this an interesting dichotomy to look at because the cow-calf sector is so disjointed. Yeah, and that's a function of how much space the animals need to actually live. So different than a lot of pork and poultry productivity, the beef industry is financially independent. All the different sectors of the beef industry operate independently. The cow-calf producers, they sell their animal to the backgrounders. Backgrounders sell them to the stockers. Stockers sell them to the feedlot. Feedlot sells them to processing, and then they sell it to the marketplace and then sells it to you. Yeah. But you can see that at every single one of these switches, there are an exchange of funds. Yeah. So this means that a calf could have up to 4 or 5 owners, up to 4 owners before it reaches the slaughterhouse. Minimum. And this is a really straight line. Sometimes it's mostly never this straight. I tried to really simplify it just for presentation purposes, but in this little space here between calf operation and feedlot, it's a Wild West, right? There could be order buyers, auction marts, stockers, backgrounders, and some animals may make multiple stops. Yeah, it just kind of depends on their specific journey. So with that in mind, even though the sectors operate independently, the calf's experience is not. It's a continuous experience of life. Yeah. And when we're thinking about development, early life experiences, what happens, how that influences long-term perception, choices, growth, stress responsivity, a lot of the time in which we can make changes, we can really have big impacts in that space is when they're young, as with almost every other species. But you can see that as they're going through the system, they're quite young as they're going through a lot of transitions. Yeah. So we're asking a lot of these calves. I'm going to bring up a concept called the critical period. So this is from the biological sciences. It's applicable to almost all species, not just cattle. But a critical period, right, is a specific period of time in which an individual is primed to acquire or refine a skill set or a knowledge base. And if you wait too late, then their ability to learn it really goes down, right? Kids can learn languages so much easier than adults because their brain at that age is able and flexible enough to be able to gather that new information, process it. But for us, once you get a little bit older, that window's closed, Duolingo, I'll do the best I can. And then my girls, I have a daughter that's in dual language. And so rolling around in Texas, my kid translates for me. Yeah. But what happens is what happens in these critical periods can have lifelong impacts. Yeah. And so it's essentially when the brain is really receptive to specific stimuli, and when the brain's really going through a lot of rapid changes. And so new information can be integrated into regular functioning relatively easily. We also know that early life experiences can have long-term implications. And we've been known this since the 1960s from the Harlow experiments. There was a psychologist who raised rhesus monkeys without a mother. And he gave them like access to this little doll looking thing. Yeah. And that was what it perceived as its mother. But when they put them in social isolation afterwards or removed them from their mother, they really had difficulty coping later in life. And really the take-home message from his research was that, mental deprivation, maternal deprivation, can really influence the young's ability to develop social skills, influences their attachment style, and their ability to cope with new things. Oops. We also know that housing animals in, oh my gosh, it's a Roomba. Yeah, okay, Roomba for the yard. So raising animals in an enriched environment versus a barren environment changes brain structure, brain plasticity. And then it'll also, individuals that are housed with access to enrichment are more willing to explore new areas and have better capacity to cope with future stressors. And in a more contemporary space, there's a lot of work happening in fetal programming where something's happening to the brain before it's even born. And where there's a lot of science coming out in this space with regards to nutrition, maternal stress, and how that influences an animal's long-term generational fitness, either reproductive fitness or their ability to grow and survive. Traumas also have lifelong impacts. Trauma can be an uncomfortable word, but trauma comes in a lot of different forms. Yeah. And we all experience, right? We have acute trauma. You have an injury. Yeah. It's a single incident. Maybe you survive a tornado. That could be a traumatic event. Yeah. Maybe you twist your ankle. You could have a traumatic event. Maybe you have food poisoning. That could be a traumatic event. And that's going to influence your future choices, because I call it barf bees and not Arby's, because it was a really bad experience. Yeah. There are complex traumas that people experience that is influenced by a lot of stuff that happens during your upbringing, your critical period. Sometimes that can be characterized as things like neglect or restraint. Yeah. And what this has, the symptoms of this are things like an upset stomach, unwillingness to eat, and this matters for cattle. Or they're stuck in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, constant activation of the stress response, which we all are stress experts and know the activation of the stress response has multitude of cascading deleterious consequences. There are also chronic traumas, so that can happen, it's something that happens over and over. It can happen at any age. And a lot of the symptoms associated with that are pain, fatigue, or they're easily startled. Yeah. Oh, what was that? Yeah. So thinking about brain development, major life changes. I promise we're going to get there. Okay. There's not a quiz, but I put this up here just to kind of give you an idea of, so for humans in years, is this a little pointy thing? No, that's okay. But at the top, we've got age in years, right? And so humans, we're what we call an altricial species. So we're born and we need a lot of help. It's just a lot of help, right? And altricial species will essentially delay some aspects of brain development postnatal into the postnatal period relative to precocial species such as cattle, right? That are born, can get up, can go do things, stuff like that. So you can see here, as we have brain development happening in humans, their primary caretakers, our primary caretakers in our current modern society, parent, guardian, or nursery until about 3 or 4, then they go to preschool. Yeah, and you can see here right around the age of 3, that's when we're getting into some social skills, some verbal skills, and then we send them off to elementary school. If we think about this in parallel with cattle, I took a little latitude on the timeline here, but if you think about this age in months instead of years for cattle as a precocial species, most of what is happening in the brain development is happening at the cow-calf sector. And then we send them off into the world, the kindergarten roundup kind of deal with the backgrounder. So so many vital stages of brain development in cattle occur when the calf is living at the cow-calf sector. So my goal for today isn't to be like, oh man, this is terrible. My goal today is to really highlight to the cow-calf producer how powerful you really are. You have a lot more power than I think you do. Because the experience that the calf has at your ranch can impact how they perform and cope at the feed yard. And I know you're not financially interested, don't necessarily have a financial interest in that, but if you're interested in welfare and sustainability, then that's something to start thinking about. But the thing is that experiences and challenges during youth is normal. Part of your developmental process, yeah? Maternal separation happens, part of the process. Painful procedures, yeah. New environments, sometimes you got to move, yeah. New foods. Anyone have a picky eater? Yeah, do you think that there are calves that may be like, I do not want to eat that? Where's my mother and I want my nursing, yeah? Or social interactions. For good or for bad, these are all things that happen and challenge. And we know that living in a bubble serves no one. So avoiding all of these challenges in life really doesn't help, you know? And we know, and I took a look through the science, and I don't know if my little animation thing, yes, it showed up. Okay, so they did they looked at quality of life relative to the amount of challenges this adversity that an individual has experienced in life. And those that had no adversity and a lot of adversity had lower quality, lower life satisfaction. But those that were in the middle seem to have a bit more. Because when you think about what comes with challenges, not only does it give you experience, it helps you make future wiser choices. Yeah, it kind of conditions you for success in the future. And so you can see how, so all these things can be challenging for cattle, but not giving it to them doesn't necessarily help them. Yeah. But if we know how these experiences can influence them, then that can potentially help guide management choices that will prepare them for success down the road. What can we do at the cow-calf sector that will facilitate success later down in the beef system? So, as I mentioned, I ran a study to try to add some knowledge in this space. So transitioning from poultry to cattle was one of the steepest learning curves I've ever had. My PhD was in layers. So I thought for sure when I got to Texas, I could say, I need 500 steers, all of the same age, and I need them next week. Thanks. And the cowboys down there looked at me like, you are crazy. Yeah, that is not how it works. So what that means is that it makes social mixing work really challenging. Really challenging due to the volume of animals that are needed and the consistency of animals that are needed to do something that's relatively objective. Yeah, so fortunately we have a lot of cattle in Texas, so I was able to run something in this space. Social mixing, we know that it happens, so the frequency, timing, and strategy with which cattle are mixed is highly variable. And we did a systematic literature review to that, and I'll show you a quick slide on what we saw. But a lot of the time, social mixing is done with a purpose. Yeah, you want to either get them of the same weight, the same age, or the same sex, so you can care for them easier, right? Make caring easy. But the thing that also happens with social mixing that makes it a little difficult to kind of tease apart and disentangle what's really going on is that there's a lot of other things that happen at the same time when cattle are socially mixed, typically. And again, your typical cattleman Andersers, it depends in which it does. But we do know that a lot of mixing happens close to transportation, near weaning, or there's potentially a diet change. And all of those things could impact the outcomes regardless of whether or not they have a new pen mate or not. So when we started taking a look in the literature, it's so very contextual as to how they're mixed. So you could have individuals that are rehoused to form groups. So we see this at auctions. We see dairy calves that are weaned and moved into hutches, or when they move in the little individual hutches into their larger groups. You've got individuals coming from multiple producers at like a preconditioned sale. That would be a space in which you would have individuals reformed into groups. You can have individuals that are added to pre-existing groups. Now that comes with a level of psychosocial stress that's, the new kid in class. Yeah, and we'll see this in the cattle industry when you add a bull to a group of cows, good or bad, it's just a new individual into an existing group. You've got a single calf that might be added into that preconditioning group sale, or you might be moving a cow into a new group after calving, depending on how you manage your operation. And another strategy that we saw was that you have multiple groups mixed together. So when we say social mixing, there's a lot of different definitions that are happening. Either when we're thinking about replacement heifers being added into an existing herd, order buyers getting cattle from order buyers getting mixed in together. Or you're trying to combine animals to achieve a certain stocking density based upon the infrastructure of your operation. So fortunately, we had 2 research stations that had relatively similar populations of cattle. So in beef cattle systems near College Station, we had cows there, and then we also have a ranch about 2 hours north of the McGregor Research Station, and they're all very genetically similar, similar compositions, similar lines, but they're housed completely independently. So I said, okay, I want all of the steers out of these two crops of calves, weaned them on the same day, put them, backgrounded them in the same way for the same amount of time at their home operations, put them on trucks on the exact same day, and shipped both loads up to our research station in Bushland near Amarillo to the research station feedlot up there. Once they arrived at that feedlot, I let them chill. I let them hang out for almost 40 days to get the weaning stress off of them, get the transportation stress off of them, get the diet change stress off of them. Yeah. And then I mixed them. So in cattle, you can't do 500 of them, but you can do about 96. So we had 6 no mix pins. So they were 100% from Beef Cattle Systems, 100% from McGregor. And then I had 6 pins where it was just an easy peasy 50-50. Yeah, real low hanging fruit. Since we don't really have much knowledge in this space, let's try to start really simple. We housed them in dry lot pens. This was their stocking density, almost 20 square meters per head, the 1/2 meter bunk space. So they weren't tightly stocked of any sort. And they were fed the same diet that they were fed during the acclimation period. So no diet changes. So this is just another little schematic if that was a little confusing, right? We've got them weaned, backgrounded, transported, we weighed them, let them chill and eat, weighed them again, and then we mixed them, vaccinated them, put them, captured their exit velocity. And then when there were cameras installed at this feedlot so that I have video recordings of cattle behavior during this time for 42 days after we mixed them. So we watched them on day 0, 1, 2, 4, 16, 32. Yeah, and continuous. So sunrise to sunset, because that's what you can see outside. There's sampling strategies in existence for looking at behavioral synchrony of resource use. And then we also did continuous observations to quantify social interactions, including drinking behavior, drinking displacements. So I really took a kind of a water focused emphasis in this one because it's Texas and it's, it's surface of the sun, it's hot. Are we good? Oh, sorry, online people.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you for letting me know.
Bueno. Bueno, that's
Sorry.
okay. That's okay. Good thing we're a friendly group. Yeah, no problem. Okay, so that's what we did. Very exciting. Yeah. In these kinds of social mixing experiments, typically your experimental unit is the pin. Did my thing stop? I'll just go over here, it's fine. But we had 25 undergraduate students all watching video. Oh yeah. So graduate students that work in my lab not only learn science, but they learn people management because that's what it takes to get through the video until the computer vision people come on board into my space. Yeah. But fortunately, she was a stickler about integrated reliability. So they're all at least 95% consistent with her and everybody else. So I've got confidence in the data. But we did an analysis at the group level, which is what you would do in some of these pinned experiments, because your group is essentially your experimental unit. But I was also really interested in what had the individual's experiences. So I know that there's risks of type 2 errors. Sometimes you got to take the results with a little grain of salt, but I also did run the analysis looking at the individuals. So did it matter where you came from as to how you handled mixing? So what we saw, the impact of mixing on productivity. When you look at the group level, there was a tendency for the mixed animals to have lower average daily gains. But what I thought was really interesting in the results was not necessarily that, because it's not terribly surprising that the mixed ones had lower productivity because they're much busier mixing each other, hanging out, doing stuff. But when we looked at where they came from, it looked like the ones from McGregor had a much harder time that were mixed. So this is the McGregor mixed ones. And they had lower gains compared to the ones that were from beef cattle systems that were mixed. I thought that was really interesting that, because the ones that were from beef cattle systems that were mixed were pretty similar to the ones that weren't. But the McGregor ones didn't seem to be doing as well. Yeah. When we look at dry matter intake, the mixed ones, there really wasn't any change. Everybody kind of ate about the same, so that's fine. But what I think is interesting here, when we think of dry mix, so no mixed beef cattle systems, the ones that were not mixed from beef cattle systems have the greatest intake. Yeah. And so you would think with the McGregor ones, they would also have lower intake. But the ones that were not mixed from McGregor had the lower intake. And I'll talk a little bit about why we might think this is a higher than expected. When we look at efficiency, gain to feed, no impact of social mixing on efficiency, either at the group or the individual level. But this is where I thought things got kind of interesting. When we looked at eating behaviors, so this is the proportion of animals within the pen that are eating simultaneously at any one moment in time on that day. So when we look at the first week of the trial, you can see that the cattle from McGregor eat the least, the cattle from beef cattle systems eat the most, and the mixed ones are right there in the middle. Cool. Yeah, that seems to be great. When we get to week 2, you can see that the feeding behavior of the mixed ones are starting to mirror those of the beef cattle systems ones. And by week 3, there's no difference between the ones that were mixed and the ones from beef cattle systems. Well, the ones from McGregor stayed pretty consistently lower. Okay. In my mind, this is a beautiful example of what we call social facilitation, and is potentially evidence that maybe a trainer animal could be effective in this space, because it seemed as though the beef cattle systems ones were much more willing to eat, and as a consequence, the McGregor ones that were living with them went along as well. Behavioral synchrony. I know I didn't talk through how I measured it, but essentially we're looking at, is everybody doing the same thing or different things? And when you're looking at herd animals, synchrony gives you kind of a metric of how well that group is working together, cooperating. The lower the number, the more synchronous they are. The higher the number, the more asynchronous they are. So we saw the ones from McGregor, they really stayed together. They were socially tight, very together. But you can see that the mixed ones and the beef cattle systems ones were more diverse in their behavioral profiles, more willing to engage in other behaviors and explore their environment. Nope. Why am I pushing the wrong button, Shauna? Here we go. Oh yeah, because down is up. Down is up. Okay. Yes, because down is up. I looked at drinking behavior. So just a quick run on drinking behavior. So looking at bout frequency, didn't see any impact of social mixing on the frequency with which they went to the water, either at the individual or at the group level. If you think about the behavior of drinking, that's a pretty ingrained from birth pattern. So it's not terribly surprising that was not affected by contemporary conditions. So I know that was like a quick overview of a pretty complicated study. And so I'm happy to go through it at other times, and it's published as well. But there's just a few stories that I took away from this experience. First of all, social mixing is not universally stressful for all cattle. Some can handle it better than others. And in this research, it seemed to be dependent on source. So that tells me that there might be something that's happening in early life that is influencing their performance down the chain. The other thing that is, it's a stalwart of information within the welfare world, but it's good to emphasize, is that evaluating group averages doesn't always tell you the whole story. And it really can mask welfare challenges experienced by the individual, because when you look at the average of a group, you're going to get probably an average. But what we really care about is what's going on at the tail ends. And if you lump them into the averages, a lot of the times they kind of get lost in the fray. The other thing that was observed is that some behaviors are influenced by current conditions while others are not. So thinking about early life establishment of feeding and drinking behaviors versus your willingness to change where you go and the resources you use based upon either temperature, diet, or social interactions. And the feeding results highlighted to me that, really a feeder training animal might really be helpful for feed intake, particularly at those operations where you got calves that are coming off pasture that may not have ever seen what a creep feeder is or not had exposure to that. So if there's a resident animal that is primed, that might be a good option for your operation. But of course, that's so very specific to your needs. Down is up. Okay. Again, a quick interlude about environmental enrichment. So people, when they think cows and brushes, a lot of people think dairy, but let me tell you, it doesn't matter what production system the cow is in, it loves brushes. Okay? So what is environmental enrichment as we kind of get through this? So pulling from some of my zoo background, is an improvement in the biological functioning of captive animals resulting in a modification of their environment. It can also be viewed as an animal behavior principle that seeks to enhance the quality of captive animal care by identifying and providing environmental stimuli that are necessary for optimal psychological and physiological well-being. And that's coming from Dr. Shepherdson at the Oregon Zoo. And then the American Association of Zoos and Aquariums, they define environmental enrichment as a dynamic process which structures changes to the animal's environments in a way that provides behavioral choices and draws out their species appropriate behaviors and abilities, enhancing their welfare. So just to have some awareness, when you hear the word environmental enrichment, you can think of it as an improvement, a principle, or a process. And all of that kind of falls under that umbrella. We know environmental enrichment's designed to elicit natural behaviors. It's a tool that producers can use to influence where animals spend their time, but it needs to be biologically appropriate. I see a lot of people that say, well, just give the cow a ball. And I'm pretty sure they took this picture probably within 30 seconds of giving the cow that ball, because what are they going to do with it? But they really do like brushes. Brushes are good environmental enrichment for cattle. From the work that's come out of my lab, we know that at least 85% of the animals in a pen will use a brush every single day. We know they're going to use it at least 5 times a day for a minimum of 10 minutes. Most of it happens in the afternoon. Another study looking at the impact of brush use and productivity on Brahmins at sexing technologies they were developing. We saw that the ones that used the brush more had greater intake and greater gains and tended to be more efficient. So there's potential in this space for behavioral phenotyping. Yeah, and we also know that massage in humans activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of the body that really calms you down and helps you relax. Well, if the physiology of cows and skin works the same as humans, then using the brush is essentially a massage that can be activating that parasympathetic nervous system, helping them chill out a little bit, which can increase intake and subsequently increase gain. A lot of the brush use happens when you're not watching. So I just ran a study last fall where we weaned calves into dry lot pens, some with and some without brushes. And I sat in a deer stand with graduate students from sunrise to noon, and then from 4 to 8 p.m. Yeah, or what is it? Yeah. No, the sun was setting around 6, so 2 to 6 p.m. 4 hours sunrise up and then to sunset. So what we see is that in the happy hours, so in feedlots, they have this thing called the happy hour from like 4 to 6 p.m., where if you're thinking about cattle or crepuscular species, they're really active in the morning and at sunset. When they're on pasture, they have a rhythm with their mothers where they get up and they eat and they play. They have a nap in the middle of the day, and then they kind of do that again in the evening before it's time to lay down and go to bed. When you put them in a pen with nothing to do, if you put a bunch of toddlers in a pen with nothing to do, what are they going to do? fight, fiddle with each other, think around. Yeah. So this is some support to that. First of all, when we looked at headbutting behaviors, those that had brushes they're in the little yellowy dots. Those had substantially less headbutting in the evenings. During the day, no difference. But in the evenings when shenanigans commence, that's when you saw an impact. You also saw an impact in the evenings on bunk displacements. So interrupted meals. Yeah, because the ones that are doing the interrupting are the ones that are bored. And so if they're bored, give them another thing to go fiddle with besides their friend that's trying to have a snack. Yeah. So the point being is some people may be hesitant to put brushes in their operation because they're like, well, I don't see anything happening in it, or they're not using them or whatever. But it might be giving you some benefit when you're not there. Because for a lot of us, 4 to 6 p.m., if you got kids, right, that's like prime after school time, that's dinner time, that's got to run the errands time, that's soccer practice kind of deal. So not as many people are watching their animals for the impact of what happens in that time of day because they got their own lives going on. And most operations, people come really early in the morning and they leave, afternoon. You can also think about strategically installing them in places where you want your animals to go. If you know they're curious and they want to use it, then I ask producers, is there a part of your pen that the cattle don't use? Perhaps put a brush there. Are they spending more time in one part of their environment than the other? And that's causing some pressure issues, some floor quality issues. Perhaps thinking about changing the location that you put environmental enrichment so it forces them to traverse and use the whole space. This is also a strategy you can implement to minimize competition for resources because you're adding another thing for them to fight with, which then reduces competition pressure. So thank you so much for your time. My take-home message is here, right? Particularly for the cow-calf producer, you're more powerful than you think. Because the actions that happens in this sector can really have lifelong implications on productivity, quality of life, and sustainability efforts within the beef industry. And so understanding what calves need to be successful can allow us as producers to prepare these calves for social and environmental challenges that they're going to experience once they leave the ranch. Potentially we can help prepare them before they leave so that they're more successful long-term. So with that, thank you so much for your time. And I don't know if we have time for questions. Yeah, we got time for questions and I appreciate your time and attention. And these are some that we have at Beef Cattle Systems. I've got them everywhere in Texas now.
Curious what time of year you bring your stuff.
Which one? That was January. Yeah, because we've got a fall weaning. Yeah, and then you let them chill. We shipped them to Bushland. Yeah, and it was just before Christmas time. So we let them chill all the way through the holiday season, and then we mixed them in January. Yeah, trying to minimize any confounds of heat stress. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Did you, or have you followed any through to look at quality or yields in the end?
I would love to. It was outside of the budget that I had to work with. Yeah. So if I would love to look at the impact of environmental enrichment on carcass quality. Yeah. And I would love to look at that, but it just takes, I was an assistant professor at a time with a really small startup. So sure. Only went so far.
The brushes.
Yes.
So do they have as much, and have you looked at them in cows in a more enriched environment, a pasture situation? Would a cow still seek out a brush?
Yes.
In a more extensive area?
Absolutely. And I think if that could be something you could think about, if you have cattle that are ranging extensively and you want to try to have a checkpoint, Are they, just, do you want to check on them? Have we seen them? Have they come by at any time, right? That could be a strategy you could implement if there's a corner of your pasture that you think is really easy to see on your drive or however your operation's oriented. But yes, they do. There's been research on it and then tons and tons of anecdotal reports. Mhm.
What is the current recommendation on changing out the brushes, disinfecting? I mean, obviously you would want to have them clean before you bring in a new group,
Mhm.
but also the risk of external parasite transmission like lice.
I mean, that's a valid consideration. There are currently no guidelines per se on that. The most information we have on how to at least stock cattle regarding brush use is coming from the dairy world and the robotic milking space. So they typically recommend 60 cattle to one brush, and I think that's just a function of time. But there aren't any sort of put in place like thou shalt use this to clean your brushes, et cetera, et cetera. I think if that's a concern of yours, then there are many types of disinfectants out there that would be worth investigating. Yeah, I think it's a legitimate concern. So, just something to keep in the back of your mind. And it may not be a good answer for like a brushes may not be a good answer for your operation. Just if you've got a lot of potential disease rolling through there, it's an it depends. Yeah. Hmm? Hmm.
So with the brushes, did you find that cattle used them one at a time or like multiple cows can use it at the same time? And if there was like not so much like a line, but like an etiquette with the brushes between the cows, if you understand.
Yeah, I didn't present it. We did look at brush use displacements, so competition around the brush. There's some, again, it's a very highly variable thing. There's some cattle that will just use it by themselves and they walk over there and they have their moment and then they go. Some of them will only go over there if there's another one already there. Sometimes there's 3 or 4 of them knocking it around, doing their own thing kind of deal. Sometimes there'll be one that's using it, another one will come up and headbutt them and force them to move out. So there is a sense of competition, but we had collars on them so we could track like, this is like red cow, blue cow, green cow kind of thing. It's pretty variable, but yeah, a lot of the competition happened in the evening as part of your shenanigans. Yeah.
Thank you. There's just so many aspects of the brushes that can be good, the social facilitation, hygiene. I was thinking about if you could set them somewhere where you wanted them to go, but I don't know if you'd really have a particular area for cattle like that. I don't know if you can think of something like that,
Well,
but
if you're thinking about, this is the size of the pen that I have. And for, sometimes animals will only use 1/2 of a space and you're like, I don't understand. Why do they all lay their eggs on the left side of the box? Why do you all like this nest box? I don't know. But that happens in multiple species. So if you want to reduce some of like the urine or manure pressure or the body weight pressure on the ground in a certain space, and that getting them to go to different parts of their environment will help, then that could be a component to think through there.
very cool.
Yeah,
Another hygiene related question.
sure.
Do the brushes, I know mud scoring is something
Mhm.
with beef cattle and it's not 100% mud.
Correct.
So do the brushes aid in like reducing mud coverage or mud scores?
Yes, and I'll tell you so I have a good relationship with the Genetic Development Center for Sexing Technologies down in Navasota. And the guy that runs that center, he's really interested in behavior and he's really interested in environmental enrichment. And so when I first started at A&M, I went down there and chatted with him and I said, hey, you should think about giving him brushes. So he bought 3 and he put them in 3 of his pens. And what he noticed that he had, not only did he have improved productivity, but because they sell a lot of their animals online, it helped keep them really clean. So it helped their profitability to the point that they've put one in every single one of their pens, and they have 20 pens, and those brushes are like $5,000 a piece. So it's a substantial, the motorized fancy ones. The stationary ones, you know, you can get them for probably around $2,500 or so. But they really did improve salability, cleanliness, and productivity. So yes. Yes, ma'am.
All I have is just a comment. So I know I came out of the dairy sector for a bit, and I've heard dairy producers also say they can really quickly tell who's sick because it's the one dirty cow in the pen, because
Mhm.
everybody gets up to brush, and if she's not getting up, something's going on. So even
Yes.
further point that the brushes help management.
Yeah, because you know, you can kind of, if you look at different types of behaviors, you've got core behaviors that you do to stay alive. And then you've got elastic or luxury behaviors you do when you've got a little extra energy and resources. And so when you're starting to get sick, what's the first thing to go? Eating or soccer practice? Soccer practice. Yeah, well, by the time you stop eating, you're really sick, right? And we've been monitoring cattle a long time for their health status based upon their feed intake, because that's one of the easiest things we can measure. But brush use might provide an earlier indicator to identify individuals that may not have the internal resources to go and engage in that sort of pleasurable behavior because they're just feeling crummy.